Let me say first that the State House Press Corps, of course, is very much a part of the State House family in any administration. And I'm especially pleased and honored to have been invited to participate in what really is a domestic but very important debate. I've always been, in some senses, a media person, by default sometimes, and sometimes, by the nature of my other engagements. I served on the board of the advisory board of the News and Tempo for many years, from inception. As a matter of fact, I was the one who incorporated the News and Tempo, and it was then that I realized just how difficult it is to do business with journalists or for journalists, because I was never paid any legal fees for all my efforts. We sat at various meetings, no sitting allowance, nothing. In fact, I always wondered, that, but I see you people selling these newspapers. How come there's just no reward for this whole exercise? So I fully understand why it is that there need be a very serious debate about this issue of remuneration. My other engagement as a media person, in quote, was when I was functioning as I co-founded an anti-corruption organization called Integrity. This was in 1994, and we had a publication called Scrutiny. It was just two sheets, the back and front, where we covered a lot of issues which we thought were corruption related and all that. And we were fortunate to have my good friend Nduka Obagbena just around the time that his newspaper started, I think, and he agreed to put this Scrutiny in between This Day. So it was circulated with This Day at the time. Then one afternoon, my editor, the editor of that particular paper, was a chap called Gbile Oshadipe, who was also a journalist. He was initially with the Tempo, I think, and then came to work with me on this anti-corruption organization, and he was the editor. So one afternoon, the SSS came and asked for the professor. Now, I wasn't there. Gbile was the one who was there. And as soon as they saw him, because he has this gentleman called Gbile has a pair of glasses, round glasses, a bit like the glasses, the round ones. As soon as they asked for the professor, he said, "I'm not the professor." He said, "It's a lie," and they carried him. and took him to number 15 Awolowo Road, where the EFCC headquarters is now. But that used to be the SSS were there at the time, Anyway, cut a long story short, Gbile's wife now calls me and says they were looking for the professor, and they have now carried my husband. My husband is not the professor. You have to go and sort out this matter, So I ended up, in fact, everybody deserted the office. All of us who were strong advocates of the anti-corruption fight, everybody disappeared. But I felt that I had no choice, because here I was the only professor in the whole setting. Gbile, my dear friend, was already been captured by the SSS. His wife had hung this around my neck, so I absolutely had no choice. So I went to the SSS place, where I was held for all of about 24 hours. Nobody said anything to me. They just sat me down there. And I would be hearing screams just down, there were some bungalows, far away. Just hearing screams, loud screams of people who obviously were being beaten or tortured or something. And they didn't say a word to me. So late that night, at about midnight or so, one guy comes to me and says, I hope you heard all this. He said, then he brought out a lot of the pamphlets that we had written and said, "Do you think these things you have written are worth the kind of thing that's going on in there? Do you think are you ready to sacrifice your life for this thing that you're writing?" He kept showing me the thing, turning it back and forth. So I was quite sure anyway that I was going to end up there. But somehow, I think it was just sheer providence, it was just sheer grace of God. Another fellow comes in, it's a lady actually, a fairly elderly lady, and says that somebody had spoken to her, apparently somebody who had taught in the university or something, and said, well, I should just go away. I should carry all my paper. I just get out of the place. In fact, I disappeared from that place so promptly that I think it also taught me two things. First, this is not, I realized that, first of all, of course, it's important to continue the struggle. But I realized, first of all, that this was not even a profession from which one could make a decent living in the first place, unless you found a really good way of doing so. But more importantly for me, I think, was the fact that there was just you're just on your own, and unlike perhaps, but in the end anyway, I think, what we found was that at least the press, the press associations and all of that, in the days of the military, supported their own. But for those of us who are not their own, who are just, as it were, moonlighting, we might just end up in detention for a long time and all that. But my third engagement with the press was that I wrote a book, which was some sort of a textbook on media law in Nigeria, where, and this book, I co-authored it with Professor Peter Fogam. And for a while, the book, I think, was used as text in a lot of law schools and faculties where media law was being studied. But one of the important things that I mentioned or considered in that book was really the whole range of issues that concern why it is that the profession, that journalism as a profession, is so wide open, and what needed to be done to perhaps regulate it in such a way that it operates in a sense like other professions. But then that perhaps is a point for another occasion. But I think what you have taken on, this topic of remuneration and retirement, is a very important issue. And especially for those in formal employment in the media. Now, there are a few reasons, in my view, why remuneration is poor, and why those in the media, especially those who are formally engaged, like many of you who are here, why your remuneration may be poor. And and I'll show you that it's not just your profession and why that is the case. The first is that it's just simply cheating. There are owners of media that are just cheats. They just want to get something for nothing. And that's not uncommon. It's a general malaise. It's not necessarily restricted to the media. It is also the same in the legal profession. There are many lawyers who will tell you, if you hear how much they earn, you will certainly not want to be a lawyer. And that's so in so many other ways. You find that that's just the way some are. So that's one. The other is that the private sector does not really recognize or respect a minimum wage. So even if a minimum wage is set nationally, it's not necessarily respected by the private sector. And this is something that should be factored into the status of a company and whether a company is even complying with its tax requirements and all that. In other places, these are points which are checked even before when you are being considered for tax, whether you are actually meeting your tax bracket or not, and all that. But that's not the case here. So we need to enforce that. We need to enforce some kind of adherence to a minimum wage structure, and not just a minimum wage to the lowest paid person, but minimum wages across the board, especially so that there is a certain amount of regulation of how people are paid and what they are paid. The third, of course, is that journalism as a profession is not rigorously, the entry into it is not rigorously enforced. Most professions are able to pay better because there is an entry requirement or entry requirements that are rigorously enforced. But that's not the case with journalism, and for good reason. I mean, there are those who are formally trained as journalists, but the profession would admit anybody at all, even if you were not formally trained as a journalist. And that's even becoming more so now with social media platforms, with blogs and all sorts of other ways by which you can enter, as it were, into journalism. And that's not the fault of the profession. It's more the way it is. That's just the nature of the business that you're engaged in. So you must take that burden along with you, because there's nothing you can do about that. Anybody can basically enter the profession. I remember years back when a good friend of mine who had started a newspaper was, in fact, before he started the newspaper, I met him I was doing youth service in Benin. I was a youth corps at the time in Benin. And he was in the University of Benin. I believe he was in prelim, what they used to call prelim in those days. It's probably 100 level today. And this gentleman was essentially an artist, even then. And he used to sell his cartoons. He used to do some cartoons and comics, and he would carry it around and sell. So I met him actually doing that. And he's a fine, great artist. But then the next time I came across him, because after I had finished youth school, I was teaching at the University of Lagos. This was in 1981 or so, 82. At this point, he had won a contract to produce 30 pages of advertisement for the Time magazine. That's the international news magazine, Time. 25 or 30 pages. So he publicized this. He was meant to interview heads of state, interview captains of industry and all of that, and put together a 30-page pullout for the Time magazine. And this was, of course, a lot of money. A page at the time, I think, was about $100,000 or something like that. And he wasn't, of course, he wasn't a journalist. He had an office, somewhere on the island. When he came to me in the University of Lagos and told me about this thing, and, we talked about how he would interview people, what he would ask them, and all of that. A few days after that, people started criticizing him. I remember Daily Times, where a lot of journalists were saying, this man is not a journalist, he must be a fraud. How did he get that kind of contract? How is it possible? How can he be a representative of Time magazine? And all of that. Cut a long story short anyway. Time then said categorically that this man is their representative. He said he's our representative. And he was not qualified in any way to be a journalist, essentially an artist and all that. But he went on to own first a news magazine and then a newspaper. And of course, so any one of us, and this is really the point, and you can't, it is both an advantage and a disadvantage that a person could be a journalist. So that in itself also affects how much one earns. The other thing, is market and the whole field of journalism. Everywhere where people are well paid, market usually determines what you are paid. Anything in which you are well paid is usually market. It's very difficult to negotiate a big pay unless it is market driven. In other words, if a newspaper person, if a journalist, somehow has found himself in a very good position in terms of the market. He is accepted by the market. He's seen as somebody who is a must-read, or somebody who on the news you must hear about him or whatever. I remember years back when, and I'm sure there are so many other such persons now. I remember Frank Olize and Abike Dabiri. They had this program called Newsline, which became very, very popular, and everybody used to, wait to listen to these two people. I'm sure that at some point they became, in some senses, if you like, very important products, or very important, they became very important items for their news organization. So their news organization had to pay them better. Otherwise, they simply will go elsewhere. And I think that market, to a certain extent, must determine pay. And this is why, in my view, one of the most important things to do is that each and every person must seek ways of self-improvement and become some kind of a sector expert, become some expert in something. This is what I found in the legal profession, for example. That first, entry-level legal profession, people are usually very poorly paid. But in 5 years after you've gone into after you worked in a firm, you become good at something. When you're good at something, your boss must pay better, otherwise you move. But if you are not good at anything, or you are so general that anybody can replace you, then the market simply says that you don't really deserve to be paid much better. So market is very crucial. And I think that self-development is a very important aspect of market. And then, of course, market also determines whether a newspaper or a TV station will make money. There are some TV stations today that are obviously making money, no question at all. Channels is making money, no question. No matter what they tell you, they are making money. They are making money. And of course, there must be others making money. Now, if they are making money, they must pay, And I'm sure, on Saturday, I heard that they were paying very well, from some guy who had retired from China. Said they were being, very well paid. I'm sure that Gloria will confirm behind there that she's on easy streets and that life is, is just hunky-dory. So that's great. But again, it's market-driven. Why is channels making money? Obviously, it's a TV station that many people watch. So it gets the advertisements, it gets the endorsements, and all of that. And that's how it works everywhere else in the world. Everywhere else in the world, it is where journalists are well paid. Market is crucial, And with and if that is the case, then pay should then be a function of the success of the news organization, assuming there is no cheating. Now, professional associations, in my view, should also be involved in this whole debate. It's important for professional associations. This happens in many other parts of the world. Actors' guilds and all of those newspaper associations are also strong lobbyists for good pay for their members. And I think that should happen more frequently. I think that professional associations should engage newspapers or TV stations that don't pay. They should engage them. And I think that engagement should be much more robust and a bit more attention should be paid to it so that, people are generally better paid. There's no question at all, and this leads me to about the last but one point. That generally speaking, people are poorly paid anyway in this country. People are very poorly paid. In the private sector, people are generally poorly paid. And that goes and public sector. That goes for everyone. So there's a need for us to look at the broad perspective as well. Why is it that people are so poorly paid? Practically everyone. Look at the judiciary. I know that for a long time, in 1999, when I became Attorney General in Lagos State, judges were being paid 67,000 naira a month. And when I met with a group of senior judges at the time, when we were trying to talk about their pay and all that, and we looked at, we also, about 6 or 7 of them, we sat around, and looked at their pay, and then asked a few questions. So let's even determine how much would be an income that would make sense for a judge. So you have 3 children, they're in private school, one of them is even abroad. We write down how much that will cost. So you have medical bills, and we write down how much. By the time we were tabling these amounts of money, one of them said to me, look, Attorney General, forget this nonsense. This thing is not big. As you can see for yourself, what we're earning and what we actually spend is so far apart. So he said to me, look, you people pretend to pay us, so we too pretend to work. And really that's how it plays out. It's very evident that there is such a huge disparity between what people earn and what they're really supposed to earn to even make a decent living. And that's the same for everybody. So we really need to take a look at that, public sector earnings and all, which we did. We did that in Lagos State. We took a look at, public sector earnings and determined, what we thought was, especially for judges at the time, and determined what we thought was the, right, the right sort of levels of payment and all that. And the point that Atta made about the journalist who was in retirement, in fact, one of the reasons why I was very active in pushing for better remuneration for judges, and I think we're able to achieve some sort of a revolution on that, because when we did so in Lagos, it affected everybody else, and everybody else moved up their wages. It was because I went to visit a judge, a retired judge. He had been retired for 10 years, very honest, straightforward man. I met him in a house in Bagada at the time. He was living in somebody's boys' quarters, 2 rooms in someone's boys. This was a judge who had retired 10 years post-retirement, living in 2 rooms. 1 room was full of books, which is like a living room, full of books everywhere. That's where we sat. And the other was a bedroom, It was just so depressing. There's no way, I'm sure that the reaction of anybody who would come there, who was a judge, who would come and visit him, would be, just as Atta said, this cannot be my portion. So I think generally speaking, we have to address the whole, concerns around what people earn, why it is right for people to earn what they earn. For example, if the president, look at the president of the country. The president of the country, aside from the fact that food is free, transportation is free and all that, in any event, at a certain level, those sorts of things are not even the issue. But if the president of the country earns less than 2 million naira a month, I think his wage is 1.75 million naira. That's about under 2 million. My pay is 1.5 million naira a month, right? Now, how does the president of the country earn that kind of money? It doesn't make sense now. And ministers even earn much less. Ministers don't even, they don't even have housing. So it says 4 million naira is the housing allowance for the minister's rent here in Abuja, right? Now, if, for example, we're to review ministers' remuneration, what would you guys say? You'll be all over the press saying, what does the country earn, this and that and all that. But the truth is that we cannot pretend that these are wages that make sense. They don't make sense. How is it that the president of a country earns 2 million naira? Why? If a president of a country does not earn as well as a CEO of a good company, of a good private company, then there's something wrong with that kind of system. There's something wrong with it. If a judge can't earn decent money, there's something wrong with that. So I think our whole orientation about what people are paid and how people should be paid, and I think you as journalists also have a role to play in that whole idea of fairness. What is a just pay? What is a sensible pay? What is a pay that ensures that people don't go and improvise in their, whether it is brown envelope or blue envelope? What's the kind of pay that gives a man enough dignity to say, I'm not going to be accepting or going to make demands of people, when they give me a brown envelope or whatever it is. And I think that debate is something that we ought to have. It's a wide issue. It's not just one thing. I think just as a last point, the other thing I'd want to say, and I was having a discussion with the State House, with the PS State House, but before that, I think we talked about the contributory pension scheme and all that. I think that's an important thing. I'm sure that most of us participate in this contributory pension scheme. As a matter of fact, one of the great comforts I think that we have is that, well, at least this scheme, so long as our employers pay their own part, if there's a portion for them to pay, we're likely to be able to have some kind of decent pension. But I think this is important, and I think it's something that all of us, all the employers must be compelled to do. The contributory pension scheme, so that we're at least successful. As I said, I was speaking to the State House peers. And I thought that perhaps the reason why he was invited here was not just to give a goodwill message. Perhaps he could make some commitments as to some decent. We have for long been saying to the peers that we all work here in the State House. Even lunch, just a place where. So I think even if we can't get anything else out of the peers, we might just be able to get away with lunch, maybe beginning 2018, maybe. So it's my special pleasure then to declare this retreat open and to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. And I pray that 2018 will be our best year yet. In Jesus' name.